I threw away 15 years and 3 kids for a man with 3 ex-wives. Now I'm jobless and sleeping on his couch. I started dating Nathan when we were both 16. And honestly, back then, everything felt so simple. We had this whole future mapped out. Get married, buy a house, have kids, grow old together. The typical suburban dream that everyone's supposed to want. And for a long time, it worked. We got married young, had Olivia first, then Lucas, and later the twins, Emma and Jacob. Nathan got his steady job with the night shift, which paid well enough for me to stay home with the kids when they were little. But somewhere along the way, things got stale. Really stale. Nathan would come home from his night shift right when I was getting the kids ready for school, sleep all day while I handled everything, then wake up just in time to eat dinner and head back to work. We were like ships passing in the night, except it wasn't romantic. It was just boring and lonely. He tried to make conversation about his spreadsheets or some new investment strategy he'd read about, and I'd nod along while thinking about how this couldn't possibly be all there was to life. When the younger kids got to middle school, I decided I needed something for myself. I'd always been good with my hands, liked figuring out how things worked, so I enrolled in a diesel mechanic program in Riverdale. Nathan was supportive in his typical analytical way, running calculations about the potential return on investment for my education and creating a budget spreadsheet for our transitional period. What he didn't calculate was how amazing it would feel to actually be good at something again, to have coworkers who appreciated my skills and treated me like a real person instead of just someone who managed the household calendar. That's where I met Caleb. He was one of the senior mechanics, probably early 50s, with these incredibly capable hands and a laugh that actually made me feel funny and interesting again. He'd had 5 marriages that didn't work out, which should have been a red flag, but honestly, it just made him seem more experienced, like he knew what he wanted and wasn't willing to settle for boring anymore. When he'd explain engine problems to me, he'd stand close enough that I could smell his cologne. And he'd actually listen when I had ideas instead of just nodding politely like Nathan did. At first, it was innocent. Staying after work to practice on the training engines, grabbing coffee with the crew, going out for drinks on Friday nights. Nathan barely noticed because he was usually asleep when I got home anyway. The few times he asked about my late nights, I'd tell him I was bonding with my female coworkers, which wasn't technically a lie since there were other women in the program. He'd just nod and go back to his laptop, probably updating some spreadsheet about our monthly expenses. But then Caleb started texting me more often, funny memes about work, questions about weekend plans, little inside jokes from our conversations. I found myself checking my phone constantly, deleting the message threads because I didn't want Nathan accidentally seeing them and getting the wrong idea. Not that there was anything actually wrong happening. We were just friends who understood each other in a way that Nathan and I hadn't in years. The real turning point came when Caleb invited me to join him and some other coworkers for drinks after a particularly frustrating day dealing with a difficult customer. I told Nathan I'd be out late with the girls from work, which again wasn't technically false since there would be other women there. But when we got to the bar in Brookhaven, it ended up being mostly Caleb and me talking while everyone else played pool or watched the game. He told me about his divorces, how his ex-wives never understood his work schedule or appreciated how hard he tried to provide for them. I found myself opening up about how lonely I'd been feeling, how Nathan and I barely talked anymore except about logistics and bills. We closed down the bar that night and Caleb walked me to my car. For a moment, I thought he might try to kiss me and I realized I wanted him to, but he just squeezed my hand and said he was glad we'd become friends. I drove home feeling more alive than I had in months, even though nothing had actually happened. After that, the late nights became more frequent. Sometimes it really was group outings, but more often it was just Caleb and me, talking about everything Nathan and I never discussed. He'd ask about my dreams, my frustrations, what made me laugh. He remembered details about stories I'd told him weeks earlier. When I complained about Nathan's obsession with financial planning, Caleb would joke about how life was too short to spend it all worried about retirement accounts. I started coming home later and later, sometimes not until 9 or 10 at night. Nathan would be awake by then, making his boring dinner and getting ready for work, and he'd ask where I'd been. I'd tell him we'd gone for drinks after class or that we'd stayed late to work on a project. He never seemed suspicious, just mildly curious, which honestly made me feel even more invisible. If your wife is coming home hours late, multiple nights a week, shouldn't you be at least a little concerned? The texting escalated, too. Caleb would send me good morning messages, funny observations throughout the day, and late-night conversations that went on for hours. I got better at deleting the evidence, clearing our message history every few days just to be safe. When Nathan was home, I'd keep my phone face down or take it with me to the bathroom. He never asked to see it, which made me feel like he didn't care enough to be suspicious. Then came the night that changed everything. Caleb had been texting me around midnight, complaining about not being able to sleep, and asking if I was awake. We ended up messaging back and forth until almost 4 o'clock in the morning, just talking about random stuff, music we liked, places we wanted to travel, what we'd do if we won the lottery. Silly conversation that made me feel like a teenager again instead of a 30-something suburban mom. When he suggested we meet up for an early morning walk before work, I didn't even hesitate. I told him I'd sneak out around 5 o'clock so we could watch the sunrise and grab coffee before our shift started. It seemed romantic and spontaneous. Everything my life with Nathan wasn't. I set my phone alarm for 4:30 and planned to slip out quietly while Nathan was sleeping. But when my alarm went off and I was getting dressed, Nathan stirred and asked where I was going. My heart was pounding, but I managed to sound casual when I told him some of the girls from work wanted to go for a morning walk before class. He looked at me strangely and said something like, "I thought your shift doesn't start until 9. But I just shrugged and said, we wanted to get coffee afterwards and catch up. He didn't try to stop me, but I could feel him watching as I grabbed my keys and headed out. The walk with Caleb was everything I'd hoped. We talked and laughed, and he bought me coffee and a pastry from this little place near the training center in Crestwood. He told me I looked beautiful in the morning light, which was something Nathan hadn't said to me in probably 7 years. When Caleb dropped me off at my car, he kissed my cheek and said he hoped we could do it again soon. I floated through my classes that day, replaying every moment of our morning together. But when I got home that evening, Nathan seemed different, more alert, more focused on me than usual. He asked more questions about my day, about my coworkers, about why I'd seemed so tired lately if I was going to bed early. I deflected as best I could, but I got the feeling he was paying attention in a way he hadn't before. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Nathan acting strange. He'd be awake at odd hours, sitting at his computer when he should have been sleeping before work. A few times, I caught him looking at his phone with this intense expression, like he was reading something important. When I asked what he was doing, he'd just say work stuff or checking investments, but something felt off. I started being more careful about my phone, deleting messages with Caleb as soon as I read them instead of waiting until the end of the day. I varied my excuses for staying out late. Sometimes it was study groups, sometimes drinks with coworkers, sometimes errands that took longer than expected. I thought I was being smart, covering my tracks, staying one step ahead of any suspicion. Caleb and I had moved beyond just friendship by then. We'd kiss when we said goodbye, hold hands when we walked, talk about how much we meant to each other. He told me his previous marriages had failed because he'd never felt this kind of connection with anyone before. I told him about how lonely I'd been with Nathan, how we'd become more like roommates than spouses. We talked about what it might be like if we could be together for real without having to sneak around. But I wasn't ready to blow up my whole life yet. The kids were still young, and despite everything, Nathan was a good father and provider. I told Caleb we needed to be patient, figure out the right way to handle things. Maybe Nathan and I could separate amicably, work out custody and finances without a huge dramatic confrontation. I just needed time to plan it all out properly. That's what I was texting Caleb about that night in April when everything fell apart. We'd been discussing how to approach the situation with Nathan, whether I should just tell him I wanted a divorce or try to ease into it gradually. I thought I was being responsible, trying to handle things like an adult instead of just running away impulsively. I was in the kitchen making coffee the next morning when Nathan came downstairs earlier than usual. He had this folder in his hands and this expression I'd never seen before, calm but intense, like he was about to deliver bad news he'd been preparing for. He sat down at the table and looked straight at me and said, "I know more than you think I know, so you might as well start talking." My first instinct was to act confused, maybe a little offended that he was being so dramatic. I asked him what he was talking about, tried to look genuinely puzzled, but then he opened the folder and I saw phone records printed out and highlighted. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay calm. Phone records didn't necessarily prove anything. People text coworkers all the time, so I went on the offensive instead. I told him I didn't appreciate being ambushed like this, that if he had concerns about our marriage, he should have talked to me directly instead of playing detective. I pointed out that he'd never even told me his phone password, that he was being hypocritical, acting suspicious when he was just as secretive. I demanded to see his phone if he was going to make a big deal about mine. But Nathan wasn't backing down like he usually did when I got assertive. He just kept staring at me with that weird calm expression and said he'd found the deleted messages. Over 700 texts with Caleb just in the past month. My heart was racing, but I tried to act like it was no big deal. I told him we barely talked anymore anyway, that of course I was going to develop friendships with people who actually listened to me. That's when I decided to tell him part of the truth. I admitted that Caleb and I had been talking about my marriage, that I'd been considering asking for a divorce, but wasn't sure how to bring it up. I made it sound like Caleb was just a friend helping me work through my feelings, like a therapist or something. I said I'd been planning to talk to Nathan about it soon, but I wanted to figure out the right approach first. Nathan didn't buy it completely, but at least it gave him something to focus on besides the affair angle. We had this long, awful conversation about what was wrong with our marriage, whether we should try counseling, what would happen with the kids. I played up the "we've grown apart" narrative. Made it sound like this was just a natural evolution that happened to lots of couples after so many years together. For a few days, I thought maybe I'd manage the situation. Nathan seemed hurt, but not furious, disappointed, but not vindictive. He even suggested we try praying together about it, which was so typical of his approach to everything. Let's make a plan and ask for guidance and handle this responsibly. I went along with it because it bought me time, but I was already past the point of wanting to fix things with him. I kept seeing Caleb just more carefully. We'd meet for lunch instead of staying out late, text less frequently, be more strategic about when and how we communicated. I told Caleb about the confrontation with Nathan, how I'd managed to frame it as a marriage problem rather than an affair. Caleb was impressed with how I'd handled it. Said it showed I was thinking clearly about our future together. But then Nathan started acting different again, more distant, less interested in working on our relationship. He'd come home from work and barely speak to me, just focus on the kids or disappear into his office. When I tried to bring up marriage counseling or talk about our problems, he'd give me these short, polite responses that didn't lead anywhere. I found out why when Olivia called me one afternoon, absolutely furious. Apparently, Nathan had told the kids about my friendship with Caleb, and Olivia had put two and two together. She accused me of having an affair, of lying to everyone, of being selfish and destructive. I tried to explain that the situation was more complicated than it looked, that her father and I had been having problems for years, but she wouldn't listen. The worst part was finding out that Lucas, my oldest, had already figured it out, too. He'd apparently been suspicious about my behavior for months and had even talked to Olivia about it. Now, he was barely speaking to me, treating me like I was some kind of stranger who'd invaded his house. The younger kids didn't understand what was happening, but they could feel the tension and kept asking why everyone was acting weird. Around this time, Nathan dropped another bombshell. He told me he joined some dating app and had already met someone, a divorced woman who'd apparently been cheated on by her ex-husband, too. He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was telling me about a new restaurant he tried. I was absolutely furious. How dare he start dating when we were still married and living in the same house? It was hypocritical and cruel, especially when I was trying to handle my situation with Caleb discreetly and responsibly. But Nathan just shrugged and said I'd made my choice. So, he was making his. He'd already paid a $3,000 retainer to a divorce lawyer and started the paperwork. He said we could keep living together until things were finalized for the kids' sake. But as far as he was concerned, our marriage was over. The next few months were absolutely miserable. We were like hostile roommates, barely speaking except about logistics with the children. Nathan would come home from work and ignore me completely. Just help the kids with homework or watch TV with them. When I tried to talk to him about practical matters, bills, schedules, repairs that needed to be done, he'd give me these cold, minimal responses. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own financial reality. The car payments were killing me, especially with Nathan no longer contributing to what he considered my expenses. I'd gotten used to having two incomes, and suddenly I was trying to manage on just my mechanic's salary while paying for a vehicle I could barely afford. I ended up having to return the car to the bank, which was humiliating, but necessary. Work was getting complicated, too. Caleb and I were trying to keep our relationship quiet, but people were starting to notice that we spent a lot of time together. There were rumors, jokes, pointed comments from some of the guys who didn't like the idea of a woman in their workplace. Anyway, a few of them started complaining to management about unprofessional behavior and workplace drama. Things got even worse when Nathan moved out of the house and into a rental place just a few blocks away in Meadowview. He said it was temporary, just until the divorce was final and we could figure out the permanent custody arrangement. But Lucas immediately announced he was going with his father. And even the younger boys seemed more excited about visiting Nathan's new place than staying home with me. I made the decision to have Caleb move in with me. We were basically together anyway, and I needed help with the mortgage and expenses. It felt like a natural step forward in our relationship, finally being able to live together openly instead of sneaking around, but it caused even more drama with the kids and gave Nathan ammunition to paint me as the villain in the divorce proceedings. The job situation came to a head when I got called into the supervisor's office and told there had been multiple complaints about harassment and unprofessional conduct. They wouldn't give me specific details, but it was obviously related to my relationship with Caleb and the gossip that had been going around. I tried to defend myself, pointing out that I'd never done anything inappropriate during work hours and that this was clearly discrimination against me for being a woman in a male-dominated field. But they'd already made their decision. They fired me effective immediately, citing violation of workplace conduct policies. Caleb tried to stand up for me, but they told him he was on thin ice, too, and should focus on his own job if he wanted to keep it. It was completely unfair. Plenty of people had workplace relationships, but because I was the woman and the newcomer, I was the one who got blamed. Now, I was unemployed right in the middle of divorce proceedings. Nathan's lawyer was arguing that I should get minimal support since I'd chosen to leave the marriage and had demonstrated financial irresponsibility. They pointed to the car situation, my job loss, and the fact that I'd moved another man into the family home as evidence that I couldn't manage my affairs properly. The divorce was finalized in late July, and the settlement was worse than I'd expected. Nathan got to keep most of his retirement accounts and stock options, claiming they were earned through his individual work efforts. I got $58 a month in child support, which was insulting considering his salary. The custody arrangement gave me every other weekend and one evening a week with Emma and Jacob since they'd chosen to live primarily with their father. The house situation became impossible after that. Without my job and with Caleb only working part-time, we couldn't afford the mortgage payments. Nathan refused to help, saying the house was my responsibility now, and he had his own rent to pay. I tried to negotiate with the bank, looked into refinancing options, even considered taking in roommates, but nothing worked. Eventually, I had to put the house up for sale. It was heartbreaking watching strangers walk through the home where I'd raised my children, criticizing the paint colors and asking about property taxes. The real estate agent kept pushing me to lower the price, saying the market was tough and I needed to be realistic about what buyers would pay. Caleb tried to be supportive, but the stress was affecting our relationship, too. He'd been hoping to find a better job, maybe move somewhere with more opportunities, but now he was stuck helping me deal with my financial mess. His ex-wives had apparently put him through similar situations, and I could tell he was getting tired of the drama. Lucas still won't speak to me directly. If he needs something, he'll text Olivia or ask Nathan to pass along a message. Olivia is slightly more communicative, but clearly disappointed in me. She keeps asking why I couldn't have just talked to their father about my problems instead of going behind everyone's back. The younger boys are caught in the middle, confused about why their family fell apart so suddenly. Nathan, meanwhile, seems to be thriving. He's gotten serious with his new girlfriend, some woman who apparently thinks he's wonderful and appreciates his steady, responsible personality. He's been traveling more, taking trips to places like Bali that he never would have considered when we were together. His job has been going well. And he's talking about early retirement and maybe moving abroad. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choices, not about leaving Nathan. That marriage was dead anyway, and we both deserved better than what we'd become. But maybe I should have handled things differently, been more strategic about the timing, thought through the financial implications more carefully. Caleb keeps reminding me that we took a risk for love, and that has to count for something. The hardest part is feeling like everyone sees me as the bad guy in this situation, like I'm the one who destroyed a happy family for selfish reasons. But they don't understand how lonely I was. How disconnected Nathan and I had become. How much I needed to feel valued and appreciated again. Caleb gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Passion. The sense that someone actually cared about my thoughts and feelings. I know the kids will come around eventually. They're hurt and confused right now, but once they're older, they'll understand that sometimes people grow apart and need to find happiness in different places. And maybe the financial situation will improve once Caleb and I get back on our feet and find new jobs. We're talking about moving to a different city, starting fresh somewhere that doesn't have all these complicated memories and judgmental people. It's not the life I planned when I was 16 and thought I had everything figured out. But at least now I'm with someone who actually sees me as a person instead of just a function in his carefully organized existence. That has to be worth something, even if it came at a higher price than I expected to pay.